me being as a Muslim, the person who bears the brunt of Islamophobia, I think I have the right to determine when I should be able to use that word. And if I feel it is appropriate, then I think others should trust what I'm saying. Same with sexist or racist. I feel very comfortable calling people these things to point out what they are. I think with the lack of name calling, like I get it, but uh, you know, sometimes you really just have to put the person in their place and tell them where they are, where they're being in the wrong, and you just sometimes need a label. Islamophobe, you're being racist. You're an Islamophobe, you're racist. You're sexist. You're a homophobe. Yeah.
Well,
at least with the Islamophobe part, I feel very comfortable using it when I feel it. And I definitely have encountered people where I have publicly called them Islamophobes, and that is not something I'm going to back down. I'm going to back down from, you know, and I'll just leave it at this so I can hear from the other panelists. But minorities are already so burdened. We're already so burdened. Why? We should not be burdened with another task of defining or dealing with this notion of what civility is. We are already burdened enough. I'm not going to get any sense at all.
Yeah. So I would, to support that, the idea that calling someone an Islamophobe or transphobic or xenophobic or racist, the behavior has to be defined in order for us to address the core of what's being communicated.
And to hold someone responsible.
Yeah, and so to eliminate that out of our language would be to protect people who are willing to harm us as a result of their actions or behavior, or even farther, to go even farther, is to not allow people who are in love to get married, or not to allow immigrants to live in peace and harmony with our community. And so we have to be able to define those things. And it kind of, when we talk about stereotypes, it's been, I felt like this ever since high school. You hear me say that a lot because that's where a lot of these epiphanies for me came to reality, to fruition, because I was constantly getting beat down as the only brown kid in a predominantly white school. And the idea of stereotypes, it's automatically perceived as like a negative. I don't see that at all. I believe that stereotypes actually could save your life. And I've used this analogy a million times in the sense of like, we're walking down an alley. It's late at night. It's midnight, and we're walking together, and we see a group of teenagers at the end of the alley, right? And we need to get to our vehicle, and they say they're all white kids, right? Do we continue to walk down that alley because they're white kids, or do we kind of realize that they're young, they're rambunctious, maybe we shouldn't head that way, maybe we should go the other way? Or they're black, right? It really doesn't matter in that scenario. We're going to use what we know about our experiences and judge whether or not that's a safe scenario. And I think this is where stereotypes are not necessarily a negative thing. We might have ended up getting mugged at the end of that alley, and it's okay for us to worry about those things. We would be foolish to walk down that alley without considering our preconceived notions about what we see down at the end, possible dangers. But when we go into defining things, the language, this is one thing that has become, from in every social issue that we can talk about, I've always come from the position that more language is better. The more language that we have to define things is better for humanity. And the more that we try and limit forms of expression, whether that be swearing, name calling, or whatever it might be, eliminating words from the language doesn't lend us to like opening our perspectives or having a better understanding of one another, especially when you take into consider things like class and education and those things that are going to affect people's ability to communicate certain ideas. If we are now saying your language is no longer automatically say fuck, shit, damn, motherfucker, and now you are no longer credible, then we've eliminated a huge a portion of people that have every right to be able to communicate and participate in the social contract. And that's where the civility element and that idea of language becomes really slippery slope.
Just add one thing to that. You know, I said earlier that sort of I was introspective about it for a minute, and then it sort of blew up in my heart a little bit. One of the things that I kept thinking about as I kept reading that, and then I heard you say it again today, is that I'm being asked to give something that I've never been really able to expect as a person who represents LGBT. I've yet to be able to really expect that in a lot of ways. So my wife and I can walk down the street and be holding a hand, and we take a calculated risk if we continue to hold hands around a group of folks. Or incredible shame that I feel if we have to drop hands to go by that group of folks. It's just something that, like, you know, I feel like I'm being asked to do that I've never really been able to expect from many people.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say about this is that my work on marriage equality taught me a very valuable lesson. Part of the work that we did on marriage equality was to listen to the other side without responding until they were completely finished. Many times that conversation would leave you in tears, listening to what the other person had to say about who you were, what you wanted. I remember standing in the middle of the rotunda with a sign that just simply said, "Love is love." I was standing there with people shouting in my face, tears rolling down my face, as they were shouting things like dyke and pervert. And my job was to stand there and to let them say that. So.
Nicole, I think you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I think what the other panelists have really said is that I think that statement, I remember when I read it, it really sort of assumed that we were all entering these spaces with the same equal amount of power, and that our identities were all we were already starting from an equal position, and it really privileges the privileged, right, in any given situation. And so it assumes that you're entering into that space and that you can, you know, we all come in here, we're all in this room with all of our identities and our experiences and all of what that means to us. And then we're expected to then not recognize the asymmetries of power and to not work to, within that conversation, within that dialogue, within a public forum, break that down. And a few years ago, back in 2009, I was trained as a multi-partial mediator, something that is pretty rare. Most of the time we think about mediators as being impartial, and multi-partial mediation was new to me at the time, but it really spoke to me in terms of just my social justice soul, because it really was about radically understanding that people were coming into conflict resolution situations, forums, dialogues with unequal power. In any situation, whether it was a family dispute, whether it was a community dispute, any type of college campus dispute, and that you needed to work actively as a facilitator, as someone engaged in that process to really listen to the people that don't necessarily always have that voice, the marginalized, right? And that wasn't the bad thing, that was your job. And so even things like being able to, you know, I mean, after this conversation is over, looking around the room and saying, let's not give the mic to, you know, certain people that have privilege and power in the room, right? Because that often happens, you know, that person ends up taking up all the air and all the space in the room. And we all come with our own privileges. I feel like oftentimes, you know, I start talking and people are like, oh, she's just a black woman. You know, she doesn't, you know, there's this sort of social justice Olympics of what that might mean. But I also have considerable class privilege. I have cisgender privilege. I have straight privilege. I have able-bodied privilege, all these things, right? And I have worked really hard to be an ally and to be in solidarity with people around those issues. And my thing about civility, I'm getting emotional, is really that, you know, as a black woman, I was taught through infancy to basically practice civility, to practice respectability for my own survival. And that means that I had to be educated, I had to be eloquent, I had to make sure that in certain situations I was dressed a certain way, that I addressed people in a certain way, because I could lose my job, I could be thrown out of a classroom, so many different things, right? And so that practice, Brittany Cooper has a great essay about this called Eloquent Rage, it's called Ponytail Politics. And she talks about this eloquent rage that women of color, for example, have to practice. And this rage that really it's an art, it's a practice, right? Because we are often asked to give civility in situations where you shouldn't have to, and where your own rage is deemed illegitimate. And Audre Lorde spoke about that anger is not, Black women's anger is not the thing that is choking the world out. It is not the thing that is killing people. It is not the thing that is putting people in prison. It is not the thing that is causing the situations in our world. And so that anger is actually really formative and generative. And I think oftentimes when we think about this civility, beyond and including, sort of the colonialism and imperialism and all that baggage and that legacy that we all sort of come from, about what that means to be civilized and uncivilized, and to embody what an uncivilized person might be, it's also about management of anger and in spaces. And I think it's really important for us to unpack that. What does it mean to ask other people to manage very righteous and very real anger and feelings about the way that things are and the experiences that they've had?
I want to applaud that first.
Yeah.
Well, when you said that the reason that we are constantly monitoring ourselves is so that we can survive. And I think about it in terms of filters, right? We've all got filters. We filter what we really are, what we really think, what we really want to say, what we really want to do through a million different filters. And the very, very young, babies essentially, like when Aviela came and grabbed your food. Babies have no filters. Really old people have no filters because they're like, what? What are you going to kill me? I'm going to die in a minute anyway. But in terms of survival, and I think that the more privilege you have, the less you worry about having to filter your behavior so that you may simply survive. And this would be a good time to read that Paul Laurence Dunbar poem, but I don't want to take my time right now doing it. But it's the poem "We Wear the Mask," and it starts off. I'll just quote a couple of lines. "We wear the mask that grins and lies, that hides our cheeks and shades our eyes." And it was a poem about Black survival. And when we talk about language and we say we're going to limit our language, and Kamal, you said, well, shit, fuck, damn, hell, and that's fine in this group. But if someone were to start using the N-word or derogatory terms towards the people who are LGBTQ, or the terms greaser or spick, this group, most of this group, I'm thinking, probably everybody, would have a real problem with that, So how we filter our language and how we've been taught to create different kinds of language in different spaces, to me is something that I'm really fascinated with, and I really like to observe and watch. And when there becomes a certain type of behavior that's desired, right, and then your options get more narrow, right? What you're filtering, what can you do? You have to stand there and take it, because if you were to lash back, you'd be everything that they said you were. And there may be a part of you that wants to do that. There actually, I would entertain the idea that there may be a part of us that should do that at some point, at least verbally. Words are incredibly powerful. I poet for a living, right? But above and beyond poetry, which I think is kind of a rarefied type of encoding, which in some ways doesn't have the same power as everyday language, what we use with each other. And as a man, I have to be ready to be told, not just to discover it on my own by going and reading on the internet, but to be told, Danny, you have male privilege. You benefit from the patriarchy every day. Every single day, and I will say this about myself, I benefit from the patriarchy. I think misogynistic thoughts. I probably do misogynistic things. Some I'm not aware of. Some I catch myself. When somebody comes to me and says, you're being misogynistic, or you're being transphobic, because I have cis privilege, I don't need to take that as an insult. You know, it's like if somebody told me, hey, you're sick, you have the flu, or you have jaundice, your eyes are yellow, sit down, you're hurting. I need to take it in that way, and I strive to do that. And I'm nothing special. If I can do it, then when somebody is, turns around and says, hey, you're being racist to somebody who's white, or this idea that you're putting forth is racist, it's not the end of the world. It's the beginning of something good, hopefully. So, language, filters, survival, Paul Lawrence Dunbar. Again, I'm going to say this again. When does civility become barbarism? Or what we think of as civility become barbarism? Who decides?
And I think we'll come back to that point. But Brittany, you wanted to
Yeah,
say something.
I think
Thanks, Annie.
one of the things I've really been challenged by around the framing of this campaign is the reviving civility aspect. Because I've been like, wait, when has this country ever been civil to most people living here?
We're gonna come to that.